viewers and astrologically enthusiastic people. What an introduction. Venus has entered Capricorn, and I was thinking that would be a lovely time to do a video both about Venus in Capricorn in general and about the current transit in Capricorn, which is going to proceed probably until January, including January if I'm not mistaken. So without further ado, this is the Ingress chart. It's the first chart we're looking at. And Venus ingresses, yeah, it's a little bit, Venus ingresses into Capricorn while squaring Jupiter. So even though Venus square Jupiter is a hard aspect between benefics, this is an aspect when you can desire to have too much sweet, emotional eating, be too optimistic about your expenditure, or have your optimism and your values at odds for some reasons, like your faith, your higher faith, Jupiter, your philosophy of life, and your practical value, Venus in Capricorn, at odds. I don't know, it can be even something as important as, mundane as buying chocolates instead of buying fruits, or buying more fruits than you need, or being too optimistic about something. But Capricorn is not known to be an optimistic sign. And so let's look at what Venus is going to go through. So yeah, this is the December chart. It's not really useful, but we'll begin with December 18. That's our next significant Venus aspect, and Venus is going to be already in 10 degrees Capricorn. She will she will begin to conjunct again within the conjunction to Mercury. On and off, she's been within the conjunction to Mercury for a while now. Trining Uranus, which I love. If you know me, you know I love happy aspects to Uranus. And sextiling Ketu. So that is an interesting aspect. The moon will be waning when that waning when that happens, so decreasing. So I don't expect it to be the beginning of something that's going to last long. Usually Venus-Uranus happy aspects can create like exciting relationships that renovate your life, but it can be a very, very short-term affair with this one because the moon is waning. However, it can be a culmination. Uranus is about detachment, divorce, shaking something away from your life. So if you need to shake something away, shake some values, shake some habits, you can have a bit of a eureka moment, or like something culminating. It's been shaken up before the new moon in Capricorn. On a mundane level, I don't know, because of course Uranus is in Taurus and Venus, Ukraine. I don't know if there would be like sudden ceasefires. I don't know if you can trust that. There's certainly a cycle coming to an end. I have not looked into the... if I'm not mistaken, Venus was in Capricorn when the war began. And she was about applying the conjunct Pluto. And now we're entering her next conjunction with Pluto. So I don't think the war will end, but there definitely is a cycle ending. Perhaps even about the reputation of someone, because Venus in Saturn-ruled sign is Venus in the domain of being higher up the rank. It's the kind of female CEO or something like that. Not necessarily a femme fatale, but definitely a female CEO, or somebody who is in a higher rank, or everything Venusian. So that could be that Ukraine comes to a circle because it's represented by Taurus. Ukraine coming to a circle. I know that the president of Ukraine was declared the Man of the Year by, I don't know what, like who gives these titles. Um, so that's definitely coming to something coming to a circle. With Uranus, even with the happy aspect, it can be a disruptive, something disruptive that creates that cycle. Perhaps in this cycle, Ukraine can be morally victorious, or seen as morally victorious, or something of that sort. But don't forget, there's a new moon in Capricorn, and Venus will be applying to conjunct Pluto again. So something definitely is coming. If I also think about cryptos when I think about Uranus and Taurus in general, there have been many upheavals around cryptos, and even to the point where it's the reputation of crypto is at an all-time low. Um, something coming to like something coming to completion there. Maybe there were people that kept it more ethical and now are being appreciated, or people that have been more skeptical because Venus is in Saturn ruled, are now more valued, um, even in a technological based value system or banking system or something like that. Again, something coming to an end. The sextile with Keto, well, Keto is what we are leaning back into. It's our comfort zone, but it's also eventually what we are leaning out of. Okay, heading towards Rahu, for better and for worse. And then there is the question. It's a good aspect to tap into. What are we letting go of, and what are we keeping from the past? Because Keto is not just what we are letting go of, it's also what we're leaning into in times of trouble. When we can't manifest our Rahu well, then we lean backwards, we go backwards, we study more, we go to our coping mechanisms. Some of our coping mechanisms are not terrible. Okay, if your coping mechanism, let's say, is to save money, then there are times where people are going to say, well, inflation, and so on, and inflation contributes to consumerism eventually. But then you can say, well, you know what, I don't know what to do right now. I'm just going to keep the habit of putting money aside. And while it doesn't serve you on the short run, you're psychologically not losing it from the belief that you can build something, even though there can be cases where that something may be taken away from you, or some sort of survivalistic mechanisms that you had. Now you remember that you can lean on them, but some of them are no longer effective. Okay, there are certain things you can only struggle so much, and that's an interesting with Keto in Scorpio. Scorpio can sometimes put itself in life or death situations because it wants to know that it can survive, and sometimes it can develop the actual positive belief that yes, I can make it, stoicism and so on and so forth. But sometimes there is only so much you can put yourself through, while it's like you have this capacity for going through strenuous situations, and then you have used up that capacity when training, and then you get to the actual battle and you're like, okay, now I need a luxury hotel. I need to have my feet rubbed 3 times a day. I'm retired, where you've only been training, but you're already incompetent in the battlefield, not because you're incompetent, but because you're no longer willing to put yourself through this. So the sextile, Venus sextile to Keto can be something like that. It can be something like, well, okay, like proven to myself that I can do it, but that was true to back then. And now there's no, as either no point of proving to myself that I can do it, I want to thrive, or there's just the understanding that there is only so much of that I can put myself through. And the fact that I did it in the past, on the one hand, showed me that I was able to do that. On the other hand, it has exhausted me. And that coming to terms with the edge, the exhaustion, that which cannot play out another time, it can be both. It can actually be a benefit because you understand your limitations, and even though you may have exceeded your limitations, you understand that those are limits for you. That those are things that you're not willing to put yourself through. Um, and again, with Uranus and Taurus, we have a lot of self-sustainability. Saturn in Capricorn also rules agriculture, so you might have been trying to do homesteading. You might have been trying to grow your own food, and now there are certain limitations where you say, okay, this is a beautiful thing that came out of it, but I like to have a supermarket or a grocery store that I can turn to buy my meat or my fruits and veggies or my whole foods or whatnot. Um, and still the experience was beneficial. So that can be something like that. Let's look at the upcoming chart. So we have already on December 19, we have Venus, and I was just talking about homesteading and all those things you do for yourself. And Venus on December 19 already squares Chiron and Chiron retrograde. So Chiron retrograde in Aries is definitely where you're taking account of what you can and cannot do. It's like you develop many startups. And then, pardon my Israeli, well, I come from a startup nation, so this is the idea that I have with Aries, and I have Aries in my second house. So this is the idea that I have constantly when I think about Aries as a startup company or entrepreneurship or a new business. And then there are certain things where when Chiron is retrograde, you're taking a hold, you're reflecting back to your initiations, and you kind of begin to understand how much of it was something that was actually in alignment of what my true value is. And with Venus squaring that Chiron, you might be exposed to your entrepreneurship actually being at odds with the certain values that you've had or that you have. It can be something as simple as, oh, I started this business because I didn't want to work for a boss, but now I'm an employer, and then I find myself in a situation where I don't want to do the things that I didn't like to be done to me, but I also don't have models, groundbreaking models for management because I was thinking, I'm outside of the hierarchy once I start a business, then the business booms, and I have to have an actual model, and you have to hire people, and you have to do marketing, and it's like you have to grow. But if you had a wound, the wound that you began this venture from stemmed from where Venus is now, is hierarchy, management, even to some extent patriarchy, because Saturn is also that guru, which is also a bit of a patriarch as well. And with Venus, it can also be matriarchy. And I said it several times when I addressed Venus in Capricorn. She's the matriarch. And you can meet yourself now at this point where you've succeeded and now it's becoming an enterprise, but the whole reason for you to start that was to say, oh, I want to be an actual capitalist, an actual person who starts something new and builds themselves up. But then when you build yourself up, you're already a corporation, and now you've become that which you were against in the past. So Chiron retrograde this is a good example of what Chiron retrograde can do, is kind of look back into those very things that you rejected when you or that were rejected in you when you were initiating, or when you were starting something new in your life, and kind of reflect back on that. Maybe there are new models of management that you need to take into account. Maybe there already is decentralization and it's actually another solution that's coming up. But the values and even feminine figures can present a challenge to your initiation and touch on the very wound that got you to initiate at first place. Be prepared for that. Um, this is, a square is tension. So traditional values or values of a corporation, hierarchic management, or even agriculture. Okay, maybe you said, I'm going to homestead, I'm going to grow my own vegetables, and now, you know, you need employee, like you have so many fruits that you need to hire someone um, to gather the fruits and deliver them someplace else. And now you're running into big questions like, okay, I have to pay these employees, I have to make sure that they don't suffer, and then if they pick up the fruits, then then that's their property ideologically, right? So what do I do now? So this is another, it's not a circle, it's not a full circle because Venus is not coming to conjunct Chiron just yet. Um, but it is an understanding of how do you preserve your initiation in a world, in a structure that is larger without losing the spark that got you to start to begin with. Okay, how do you become what you actually desire without losing the sense of yourself, because Aries is also the self, it's a wound you may have around yourself. And the solution can either be, oh, I didn't accept this part about me and now I do, okay, or and then I'm okay with what Venus presents, or I need to find a new model of dealing with those conflicts, with those questions, and add even more innovation as Chiron goes direct, and treat my wounds with innovative thinking. Aries is very optimistic, and prepare myself to another startup cycle. So if I was just starting up with, I'm going to do that by myself, now it is, okay, my company, my model, my corporation is going to look completely differently. And you may have seen me. So if I think about our community, you may have seen me when I scroll over my pages. I almost always have a Sphere and Sundry page open because I like the energy of their stuff. And they recently moved into like a bigger place, and Caitlin told about her employees. She's like, okay, I'm funding the like teeth insurance and the medical insurance and so on and so forth, and people can bring their pets to work and leave whenever they want to. So it's like that was like a stage that this Venus Chiron thing is going to bring, where you can say, well, I am going to be a business, but I'm not going to do that in the way that I hated that being done. I'm going to be the business that I wish I had when I was an employee. Then many of you who have Aries either around the second house, the third house, or the ruler Mars related to your second or third, or even midheaven, may start to be at the stage where now what you're doing, what you're innovating, what you're putting through is taking advantage of the role you were given in society and the position of power. And Venus in Capricorn is by definition a higher position of power. Even when she's badly aspected, if she's badly aspected, it's just going to be more difficult for her to use it correctly. But it's usually a Venus that goes up the hierarchy for whatever reasons. And now I'm going to use that to create something new. Now I'm going to do what I actually came here to do. And there's a second level of innovation that you need to come up with to realize that. Okay, you are coming to terms with the harsh reality of making sure that the people lower up the rank are as free or free enough in a way that they weren't in the past. This is why there are revolving hierarchies or changing hierarchies. In Capricorn, it's always changing hierarchies. Okay, so now women are on top. So now black women are on top. So now yellow people are on top. Even when during the Pluto in Capricorn, when Donald Trump was elected to be a president, he was a business person, and like people were, the joke around it was that orange is the new black. Okay. So there was, even in the most satirical fashion, there still is this concept of there are these new people on top, and how are they going to behave, and how are they going to ensure that they're not just going to be repeating the same old cycle of depriving marginalized societies. In Capricorn, it's always dealt with I'm going to get on top, and then I'm going to say, well, you know what? I have all these many millions, and guess what? I'm gay. Well, you know what? I'm going to be the president because I'm a business person, and anyway, there is a fortune connection with the fortune and the politics. So at least you know who am I and what I do for business. That worked for Donald Trump. Okay, we may not like it, but nobody spoke that way before. And it's always going to be that. It's always going to be the person that gets to the, to the Ivy League, that gets to the army, that gets to the political rank, and then after they have gained a position of power, they're like, well, you know what? I'm also gay. Well, you know what? I'm coping with so and so mental disorder, and they break the stigma from that position of power. This is how you do Capricorn. Aquarius is a completely different cycle. So let's see what else is up for Venus in Capricorn. And okay, we are having, this is December 22, and we are already having the Sun ingressing into Capricorn. At the same time, Venus is perfecting its trine to Uranus. And while still conjuncting Mercury, exciting news, the exposure of something. It's something that started around 6 months ago, so you want to go back, because even though we're on the verge of a new moon, it's still, it's a closing phase. The moon is closing something before it begins something new. So I would think, 6 months backwards to what would it be? Would it be probably May, April, right? And try to think to those times what began April, May, maybe I think even February, if I get it right, counting. Oh my God. So you can try to think back if it's your personal life, what began there. You might get some news from the Capricorn side. Mercury also rules youth. Venus also rules sisters. So you might get news from your sister. Maybe your sister is having a baby, depending on the sides. And, you're getting the news now, even though she's almost like conceiving in a couple of months. So that can be something as simple as that. If a relationship begins at this time, it can be very, very, very short term. You can have like a one night stand or something, but it's likely to be, depending on other factors, it's likely to be joyous, it's likely to be fun, it's likely to shift your thinking, shift your values a bit, maybe relax. With Uranus, it's probably about relaxing your values a bit, because Venus in Capricorn, I'm going to talk about in the second part of this video, Venus in Capricorn is Venus ruled by traditional values. Okay, Saturn rules tradition, Venus rules values, so traditional values. This can be like a one-time thing that kind of shakes up your traditional values, but is actually joyous, it's actually fun. So that is December 22. December 28. Now, when I see Venus sextiles Neptune, just, without looking at the chart, where's Venus going to be relative to Pluto? Right? She's going to conjunct Pluto. So Venus is applying, it's not yet within rage, but she's very much applying to conjunct Pluto, and she is perfecting her sextile to Neptune. This is already an interesting one because this is already after the full moon, so the moon is waxing. This is a time where you can meet a very spiritual relationship that is long term, or start a certain investment that has something artistic to do, or invest in art, or invest in something even to do with the spiritual community. The thing ruled by Neptune, or spying, because that's also Neptune, hacking, spying. It's benefited with this aspect. It's the beginning of something. Okay, the moon is still growing. So whatever starts there, you need to pay attention, because you might have been manifesting something at the new moon, and now you're beginning to take the first steps towards it. Venus Mercury, it can be also writing, communicating, but also hacking, also hierarchy, social finessing. Venus Saturn can also be about finessing to get up the ladder, and I'm not saying that necessarily in a bad connotation. Okay, it can be something as simple as soft skills that you're using. But remember, Venus here is before the conjunction with Pluto. She's applying to conjunct to Pluto. She's going to be very much informed. So this is a first step that is very much susceptible to be altered, to be, you're going to need to have further adaptations, simply because you're going to learn so much more when Venus conjuncts Pluto. And we've seen that around the war in Ukraine, Venus was conjuncting Pluto. We were informed about terrible actions also against women. We know Venus was besieged and so on and so forth. Yes, but definitely Venus was informed. Okay, she saw things that are of a dark nature, and whatever you're starting now, you're going to have to adjust your plan and adjust your values according to that. Okay, I can give an example. Just not long ago, I began to look at. I'm still delineating. Why am I looking at hacking? Maybe it's something with the Aquarius. Is it the Saturn in Aquarius before Pluto in Aquarius? I don't know, but I was looking at videos about hackers and so on, famous hackers, people who leaked information, and there was a show about a person, I forgot their name, that the difference was he leaked actually a very important document for WikiLeaks, but the problem was with him that you couldn't worship him, because on his computer there were found materials of pedophilia, but basically pedophile porn. So you couldn't you could not be like a hacker guru or somebody that you worship, because on his very computer there were these materials found, and then while he did something that was probably noble, he also did very unnoble things. So this is actually some of the this is something that can be correlated with that Venus conjunct Pluto. Like, you discover something about someone that you appreciated, that you value greatly, and then you get to know them more intimately, and then you find something like this out. That can be one of and why do I say hacking and all that? Because right now all the espionage, the hidden information, because of the relation to Mercury, so it's hidden information basically, And of course, Mars is retrograde, so penetrating into data, big sets of data in the hierarchy, that of people higher up the rank, can change your values, can change what you think about them. And that can also be with hackers that you've grown accustomed to. So you might find information even about the hackers themselves. Um, that can be reflective in that way. Neptune can be about espionage, can be about hidden people of both crooked nature or of spiritual nature, people who have a bit of a fog or a myth around them, people that you don't quite know how to grasp, elusive, um, and Pluto, of course, higher up the rank. Mercury, something to do with children. Venus, something to do with women. So one of that, either children find out something, women find out something that changes our value, that changes the way we see things, and then you have to adapt from there on. So now I want to take a look at what happens in January with Venus, and I found that to be the easiest method. So let's go to Venus. Oh, already in January 3rd, she enters Aquarius. And January, okay, no. January 1st, she conjuncts Pluto, but this still happens in Capricorn. So that's what I'm looking for. So this is still Venus in Capricorn, conjuncting Pluto. If I'm not mistaken, this is already the degree of the Pluto return for the USA. So this is the one last hit of Pluto return for the USA. And Venus is conjuncting Pluto, already sextiling, sort of a kind of a sextiling Jupiter in Aries. It's just a continuation of what I said, okay? Now she has crossed her conjunction with Mercury, and now she's getting informed. So we're going to see that Venus conjunction, that another cycle of Venus conjuncting Pluto. My guess is that this correlates with another beginning also related to the Ukraine-Russia war. Why am I saying that? The war began about when Venus was about to conjunct Pluto. If I'm not mistaken, that was the case. Venus was about to conjunct Pluto. There was the first touch of the US Pluto return. I think it was February 22, if I'm not mistaken. I remember exactly the beginning of the war. I know where I was in the beginning of the war. I know where I was when Pluto touched on his first Pluto return point with the US Sibley chart. I remember that, I felt that, and right now we see that the Venus is going to make that connection again while the moon is growing. And this tells me that while Venus conjuncting with Pluto again is starting a new cycle and finishing up with a certain previous cycle, because of the position of the moon, although it's not aspecting it, it is in the context of a cycle that is beginning for the world. It's a cycle of the new moon in Capricorn, and still in the context of the new moon in Capricorn. So I expect there to be a new cycle of something. And this cycle, this time, Venus sextiles Jupiter. So for me, what I see here is that Venus is not in a happy position with Pluto. She's very much informed, but she's optimistic about her chances. And whether she's right or wrong, this can, for me, signal Ukraine, and Ukraine being optimistic about the next cycle. Imagine, the president of Ukraine was declared the man of the year, so he can be very much supported or very much optimistic about his chances, about what's coming up in the new cycle, about whatever support he's getting morally to pursue on and go on another cycle. But this is not just another cycle of the moon, it's another cycle of Venus Pluto. And that is something to remember, because this one goes for more, probably around a year and a half. And that's not, even another 6 months. That's another year and a half. And many things can happen in a year and a half. I'm not going to go through the whole Venus Pluto cycle, even though I believe it's probably worth the while to do that, and especially worth the while to do that on a mundane level. And it is especially important because this is also coinciding with the US Sibley chart, and we've seen that women's right, women's reproductive right, were very much restrained, or the restraint around reproduction for women was removed, but not according to the values that women previously held and still hold. Okay, so actually a removal of a restriction, but it was a removal of a restriction around labor. You cannot restrict labor anymore. And that does with the values of that many women hold regarding to the ability to choose and the ability to not keep the children and so on and so forth. So and we've seen that when Pluto was making its return, Venus was applying, either conjuncting it or applying to conjuncting or separating from the conjunction with Pluto in Capricorn right this yet. And we see it another cycle, another year and a half. And Mercury is not too far behind. Mercury is retrograde. So there's a reflective cycle there to do with women, and probably because of Mercury, probably also to do with children. And that's another year and a half for the United States. But not only a year and a half, because this is a Pluto return, this is 300 years. And this is big. Because the last touch of Pluto in his Sibley chart return point is coinciding with Venus, women, values, and Venus in Capricorn. So women on top, values, matriarchy, traditional values of women. And unfortunately, those traditional values, this cycle, they definitely got the upper hand. Okay, the traditional woman, who is getting her job in society by merit of being a mother, and getting her rights by merit of being a mother, because the rights are for the children. And now we see that other touch with Mercury retrograde, Mercury reflecting, and this is a cycle that begins not only for another Venus Pluto that can be a year and a half cycle, but also another Pluto cycle for the chart of the United States, very much coinciding with women in the hierarchy, in the place of women in the upper ranks, and reflecting upon the role of children, and how are children treated across the hierarchy. Okay, because Capricorn is hierarchy, and of course Capricorn also rules agriculture. It can be child labor, it can be labor related things, it can be policies, governmental policies about caring for children. We've seen, for example, Obamacare came from a person who was not forget about being a black president, because it could be a black president with any kind of case and support any kind of, like, it could be a conservative black president. But his mother, if I'm not, or mother or grandmother, had problems that she couldn't take care of medically, and then he came up with Obamacare, which of course had its own bugs and its own implications. And as far as I realized, a lot of medical insurance became even more expensive because now they were mandatory, so they could raise the price because people had to buy them and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of good things and bad things around that, but definitely there was a person who was affected by his mother or a Venusian role that was old and that was Capricorn related. And not only that, he was black, which is also Saturn's ruling black uh, I don't know. I'm not sure about this Saturn ruling black people, because I think it's more Saturn ruling slavery and ruling people who are both higher up the rank, but both the people who are unfortunate in society, and it does not necessitate them to be black. Like, it's context related. So I don't know if it's true that Saturn necessarily rules black people, or he just rules slaves, and we were born into a context where slaves were black. But no, it's like not everywhere slaves are black. This is not just, U.S. centric or Western centric world. And there are many types of hierarchies, and I guess that would affect the rulership of Saturn. Maybe yes, maybe not. Um, but I can't ignore this, this point of the beginning of another 300 years cycle of Plutonian things to do with women and children in the United States. So this is January 1st. This is how we begin 2023. But again, this is beyond 2023. And on a more mundane level, on a non-US level, it's another year and a half of that cycle of Venus-Pluto. The next time Venus will conjunct Pluto, I believe, yes, will already be in Aquarius. So this is the last Venus-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. Anything Capricorn related. We are seeing a lot of this. For example, in Netherlands, there are closings, I think 300 farms for supposedly environmental reasons. And that is expected to reach New Zealand, that is expected to reach Germany, that is expected to reach many things. And yes, I know I probably owe you a talk about Germany and what happens 2 days ago. I haven't deeply looked into it myself, and yes, definitely that's worth looking at. So for those of you who do not know, there was a right-wing rich German person who basically tried to blitz the government in Germany. And currently he was not successful, but now there is a reevaluation um, of German politics and German cultural politics, or political culture, because that is not something that I think it's very much worth looking at the chart of Germany and what's going on there, because something is obviously going on there, and we definitely need to look at that. I know that's not the non-Western centric view that that needs to be, but this is something that happens, and it's on the news, and it's quite important, and has quite an impact. So again, starting like a new beginning regarding agriculture, another year and a half cycle of, farms closing right when people need food, right where food prices are high and the going even higher, and the people who make the food are having forced into closing their farms. So we don't know where is the government intending to get food from, and how much would it cost, and how many rates, and how many refugees, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't look pretty. And that's another year and a half cycle, and I don't know what will happen by the new moon, but we definitely see Venus with Pluto when the moon is growing. So I guess we are in for a lot of exposure. Okay, we're in for a lot of exposure, we're in for a lot of purging. This is the last cycle on Capricorn, so definitely agriculture is going to be highly impacted by that. And how people are going to grow their food, I don't know. And we understand that agriculture related is very much ruled by Saturn, because it requires from you dedication, it requires you to deal with death a lot. Okay, it requires you to give rest to the land. Who are the religions that are ruled by Saturn? It is the Jews. And with the Jews, the agriculture is such that every 7th year you do not plant new seeds for an entire year. And also you are giving 10% of your food away to people at need. Okay, what happens with it practically is another big question, but this is like the original tradition. Okay, very much agriculture impacted. And you understand that you have to give at least 10% to the people. If you have land, if you're growing food, if you have crops, it's a part of what you do to maintain that, because on the seventh year you will need to preserve food. You will not be able to plant new seeds, and that impacts not only the seventh year, because in the seventh year something is growing, but the year after. So there's a lot of long-term thinking, long-term planning, long-term, a lot of responsibility that is Saturnian, that is now going to be placed when Pluto moves into Aquarius. It's going to be placed on the people and not on the regime. Okay, because we were looking to the regime. Pluto and Capricorn, we were looking to the regime to provide us with food. We're looking to the regime to remove certain regulations and add certain other regulations. We're looking to the regime to ensure that corporate culture do not overtake humanity. And the finger of blame was that those people up there, that they are going to do the right thing with power to ensure the order within a chaotic nature. Pluto and Capricorn. Pluto is about to leave Capricorn, and Venus Pluto is going to be in the context of Venus Pluto, last Venus conjunction with Pluto in Aquarius. That's big. Pluto has been in Aquarius, in Capricorn, I'm sorry, since 2008. So there were a lot of governments where the number of women was beginning to be more equal to the number of men in the parliament. And then right when Pluto is about to leave Capricorn, in Israel we had a previous recent elections, and parties all across the board, right wing, left wing, were competing for who has the most number of women in their party. We even had certain women that were very questionable, women that were abusing power to misrepresent, basically to represent offenders, sexual offenders, but represent them because they were using victim blaming as a strategy to defend offenders. And this is how they came into power, and they gained their power by applying to that interest, to that questionable interest by predators, basically. And again, the problem was not that they represented offenders. Everybody's, even Eichmann was represented, but the problem was that they used victim blaming as a tactic for representation. Victim blaming is not an ethical tactic for juristic representation, but what we know about sexual offense and the psychology around it. So we had women, parties competing across the board for who has the most women, and how they apply to the evolving crowd of women by representation or the illusion of representation. But now Pluto is actually leaving Capricorn. So there were people calling to not vote because they said, well, all the parties are managed by corporations, large corporations, or Klaus Schwab, or I don't know, whoever, is the billionaire there. And whichever note you put in the, whichever party you vote, you're still cooperating with a certain system that is not in favor of the people. So this last Pluto-Venus cycle is a completion of something while we're already looking at a whole new game. It's like women fought to get on top, and now nobody wants to hear about centralized regimes anymore. So this is a very interesting point in time, and it opens up with the moon growing. So this is also true for what I said about United States. It's 300 cycle in the context of the moon growing. Okay, so it's not something that is diminishing, it's not something that's coming to an end in the past 300 years, but something that begins in the next 300 years. And let's go Yes, computer work, please. Did I annoy somebody? I'm gonna try and do it again. Thank you. 23, January. We're still with Venus. January 2nd, Venus opposes Lilith. And I think I've spoken, I've spoken about the Lilith-Pluto opposition, which I think was also related to what we've had exposed in Balenciaga, and I did a video on that. Here we're going to have Venus opposition in Lilith. Venus is still in Capricorn. It's the 29th degree of Capricorn. Again, the anaretic degree. They're like Lilith in Cancer, caregiving, reflection, lunar, like maximum lunar capacity, dark feminine, maybe. And then we have the Venus in Capricorn, which is like maybe the traditional notion of women coming into opposition with the dark feminine, maybe certain women opposing women that are on the higher up the rank, because the more individualistic growth-based or left path-based morality, that is the morality that a person develops when they work with the inner feminine, when the dark urges, with the needs, and they develop a certain worldview of the world, and a certain view of morality that is by them thinking about it and not indoctrinated. And Venus Capricorn can represent indoctrinated values around, in general, indoctrinated values, but can also be indoctrinated values around women. One, famous example is, it can be, I think it can be around sex workers, because if I think about what traditional values of women, then there's the notion that if a woman, dresses like a man, she's going to get higher up the rank, or acts like a man, she's going to get higher up the rank, in the Saturn domain. Or if a woman is adopting traditional values of, like, I don't know, no sex before marriage, and then there comes a woman that says, wait, how can I know, how can I even know the person if we don't sleep together? And that can be another, sort of a conflict of values. On the other hand, Venus Capricorn is a very practical. So this can also be a woman who did social finessing or social engineering to get to where she is, and she used soft skills to get higher up the rank. And then, perhaps the Lilith figure kind of exposes her, and there's a conflict between them, or something like, and then from the Lilith part, it can be more like, wait, that raw sexuality is actually sacred. It's not a finessing tool. It's actually something that, it's like there can be a difference of moralities around there, and I expect that to be emotional. I expect it to be either around soft skills. I expect it to be either around care, either around the emotions or the psychology involved with the raw instincts of the body, and the sensuality, versus something that is more conservative, something that is more down to earth, something that's more practical, something that says, think about the woman that says, well, I have a set of I have this body. Okay, with this body, I can get somewhere. Versus the woman that says, my orgasm is sacred. It doesn't matter if I do it, with tied up or tying someone up or this, my orgasm is sacred. Even in, I don't know, BDSM or whatnot context, even then my the sense of connection or whatever we build there, it is a sacred thing. It is not something to be abused, and it's not something to do with to do marketing with. It's not something or alternatively, it can be the woman, the traditional values that says, well, we cannot use our sensuality, or we cannot be sensual if we want to be taken seriously. That can also be the fact. And there can be the woman who insists on doing everything that could be considered something that would not get her to be taken seriously, but actually prove that she has a lot more to say and a lot more to deliver and a lot more value to bring that traditional woman. That is what I expect with this cycle. Um, and I think it's going to be a lot between women and themselves rather than between like men and women. Um, Venus is separating from the conjunction with Pluto, so she might be, but she's still starting the whole new cycle, so she might revert to certain traditional values or to another type of traditional values that she previously didn't think was true, and then Lilith is going to challenge her, which I think is an important cycle and very constructive to what Venus has to do in her upcoming cycle with Pluto, because you can get informed, for example, if you talk about offenses against women, right? Pluto's abuse of power against women, then a woman can think, oh, if I will wear something different, then I will be taken seriously. And then even though it is not right, it's practically helpful. And then Lilith can come and, wear little to nothing and have like, I don't know, like BDSM and choker and whatnot, and get and appear with men and be taken very seriously and cooperatively and whatnot. And Venus has to sort of account for that and understand right from the get-go that what she thought she was going to do for strategy, she has to change, because she's being challenged by an equally powerful woman, an equally powerful woman to Pluto. So equally powerful feminine to Pluto. So this is a very constructive, it's not an easy one, it's a very constructive and very important cycle for Venus to go through. So she can get the complexity of something right from the get-go. And this tells me that she's going to do something very important, because she's exposed, she's not only informed with Pluto here, she's also confronted with Lilith. So she has to really grow up and really mature. There is no room for simplicity. There is no room for a simple message get the points across, gets the point across. She really has to work hard. She really has to do an evolutionary job of it's not going to be a binary notion anymore. It's not going to be a simple solution. It's not going to be something that is on a surface level, because it's the last conjunction with Pluto. So she must come up with something. The next conjunction is already going to be in Aquarius, but also on the other pole there is Lilith, and she will conjunct Lilith, but it's like, okay, like you can't just get a simple solution. Okay, if I think about, for example, the Me Too, okay, so we were exposing, and I'm Me Too veteran, we were like exposing people, and we were exposing structures, and we were doing a lot, and then came the Johnny Depp case, right? Which fortunately came he won the case a couple of years afterwards. And then you actually heard recordings of that then there is a woman who tells the person right up front, nobody is going to believe you. And I think there isn't a single woman who went through some narcissistic abuse who could not identify with Johnny Depp at that point. Which, when you think about it, is very simple. We were fighting against abuse of power, we were fighting against taking the autonomy from the body, we were fighting against also gaslighting and psychological abuse. It's inconceivable that women are not the perpetrators in some cases as well, but it is very difficult because there was a cycle of many, many women that had to be believed to heal. It's like if those women were not believed at that point, or if those children were not believed at that point, they would either die or grow extremely antisocial, like Hitler, like antisocial, like seeing people as insects or something, because when you're that isolated, But on the other hand, you also don't want to give that experience back to people, like to men who are being extremely isolated when they experience something like that, and nobody believes them because they're men. So that Venus cycle was more forgiving. There was more place for women to be heard and believed. There were at least certain circles where women could be heard and believed. Just believed. Just somebody that says, I believe you. And of course, for men, like for a while, they were suspended from being believed. All the while, many of them had experienced that they were afraid that nobody will believe them, when in fact there was a lot of victim blaming. And only then came, the more intricate cases where it's a woman that's threatening a man that nobody will believe him in court. Okay? But this cycle is something like Venus is being informed about certain abuse against women that is very intense, and then maybe she wants to do the Me Too thing, and then Lilith comes. And she's like, okay, there is no place for that wave and then that wave. It has to be done together. Taking into account that the nodes are already going to be very close to Aries, and the North Node is going to be in a young Mars-ruled sign. So now think about young men, think about the strong-headed men, think about impulsive men who come to bring something new. They'll be in the front, and they will have to be accommodated for, and their rights will have to be accommodated for. So Venus has to, like, she really has to do it. She has to get to the essence of the roots of what is actually going on, and then pluck it from the root, because otherwise she's just going to run into Lilith, and Lilith is going to like kick her butt off intellectually, because like she's going to hold no waters. Her arguments are going to hold no waters. And so I guess that what Venus is about to be informed in when she crosses Capricorn is something to do with children, and it's also something that, because it's to do with children, something that men are subjected to, and it's not going to work with, let's talk about women's rights anymore. Let's talk about children's rights, because this is both women and men. That would be, I think, from, looking from upstairs, and get out of a lot of stigma that many people, like all of us, have some stigma because of our life experience. Even if we previously cognitively had those stigma, then we could have had a certain life experience, and then certain information takes more of a weight than other type of information. Mercury is also information, and that will have to be addressed right from the get-go. So that is January 2nd. January 4th, really nice, Venus sextiles Jupiter. Moon is still growing, is separating from Mars. It's still within the scope of Mars. It's applying to trine Saturn. This is a time where certain long-term relationships and partnerships can begin. Venus is in Aquarius. What I like about Venus being in Aquarius is that it is a sign ruled by Saturn, and it is it's the structure outside the structure. And this is an exact, like Venus is exactly going to sextile Jupiter. Jupiter is in Aries now. It's the merge of the intelligence and the warrior. The intelligent warrior, I believe a lot of hacking cycles, like what is hacking going to look like in in the booming growth of technology and mass technology. A lot of soft skills, hacking has a lot to do with finessing, with social engineering. And I kind of believe that this is going to be a joint of intelligence and war, intelligence and military, soft skills and military action. This is what I believe this is going to be about on a mundane level. So Venus in Aquarius, I see it as social engineering. not from a hierarchical point of view, but actually social engineering of the masses. And Jupiter in Aries saw the initiation of war, the first stages, the ignition of a fight, the type of the juvenile martial artists or something like that. And they're going to communicate, create a new form of mass social finessing. So we have the more intelligent Venus in Aquarius that is grand, like masses savvy, but she just begins her journey in Aquarius, so she's just new. And Jupiter is just like it is returning to Aquarius. It has been there, and it's going through the second round of these degrees of Aries. And we have like sort of a still juvenile Jupiter with a very like juvenile Venus that just went out of the, I wanted to say Sheol. I need to see the video about Sheol. But Venus has just left the Pluto, left the underworld. She's just seeing the fresh air again. And then she meets this, not so gentle giant who is also very young and very attractive. And he has like militant ideas to take over the world. And she has a bit of knowledge of and ideas on how to do that intellectually. And then they joined forces and formed this very optimistic duo in this transit. While the moon is about to become full, it is still waxing, and so this is something that is going to begin. And because the moon here is trining Saturn or applies to trine Saturn, it's going to be long lasting. So if it is on a personal level, and I have Aquarius in my 12th house, like I gotta be cautious. you know I might fall in love with someone, and that can take a while to that can last for a while. But if it is on better houses in your chart, then you can actually have a long lasting very optimistic partnership with someone. Notice that Mars is still it's separating, because it's retrograde, it's separating from a conjunction, but this is still in orb. Okay, so there is still a conjunction to a retrograde Mars. So you need to take that into account, because if it's happening on a personal level, if you're looking at your personal chart and think, what's Venus going to do? Or if you're in a Venus perfected year like me, then you need to take into account that this reflective Mars is still in orb with the moon, and Mars is not happy with the moon. Mars likes to penetrate things, and moon is where we want to have emotional safety. So while you have a potential for a long-term connection that has kind of very, intelligent and very optimistic and very nice drive, Mars is not quite in a good circumstances. And when you start something, this is the chart of the beginning of something. That means that only when Mars turns direct in the progressive chart, which can take a couple of decades, will you exit the situation. So don't take any commitments. Really don't make too many commitments. Don't make too many requirements on that. Don't go official until Mars is in a better position, because Saturn does give longevity. So whatever you start right now, whether it's an investment or a partnership, or even a certain belief, okay, because Jupiter is also philosophies and belief. It's going to be long lasting, but Mars here is it's not the best, and Mars is the ruler of Jupiter here. So even if you find new gurus, because Jupiter is also certain teachers or philosophers or something like that, you might they might accompany you for a while, or even for longer than they should, while their ruler is like it, you might adopt a philosophy that is not so constructive to your emotional safety at this time. So yeah, like it's not a terrible aspect, but it's not something that I would start something new in, even though the moon is growing. And then we have Venus trining Mars. So this happens in January 9th, 2023. And Venus is going to be in 8 degrees Aquarius, trining Mars, still retrograde Mars in 10 degrees Gemini. She's not making any other aspects. Well, this is a good time to reflect upon a strategy. It's a good time to reflect, to adapt a certain strategy in planning, adapt a certain planning to a new technological world. So again, what is hacking going to look like with the booming of um, technological developments? So adapting your information strategies, information gathering strategies, maybe certain types of communication, or the kind of, if you've used the word and this word interchangeably, then how are you going to do that with the growing, with the change in values in the age of Aquarius in general. So it's more of a reflective aspect than a performative one, but still a good one. Okay, Mars now has a connection to the new values that Venus brings in Aquarius. Mass technology, mass social finessing. How does Mars intend to expose or not expose, to use or not use that? How's Mars, like Mars is being informed. There's a bit of an affair with Venus here. Again, on both a mundane level and a personal level, this can mean a bit of an affair. There's a harmonized aspect between that which penetrates and that which receives. But that which penetrates is kind of like making its trial and errors time now. It's like it's reflective upon something. So whatever it tries now could be an experiment. And if you are the Venus figure, you need to take that into account. It's like either you're coming in to enjoy that experiment and see, like, discover yourself, or if I think about it, it can be a good time for companies to adjust their um, security or data security policies. They can hire like new people to try to like hack the systems ethically and then learn from that. That can be a good time for that. This can be a good aspect for that around January 9th to perform such an attack, which objective is ethical. So to see, and then if you're, the company, then you can have like a reflective Mars thinking, how am I going to adopt? How am I going to do that? And then you can experiment together, and then you can see what do you need to change to prepare your company and to prepare yourself for the growing of technology and perhaps changing of the technology that is used to connect people, and also the change of organizational standards. It's a lot easier to finesse, employees when the employees are unsatisfied. And now when Pluto is about to turn to Aquarius, what would make your employees satisfied is not promising them more responsibility or higher rank, but actually more social benefits, more creative freedom, intellectual freedom, not even funding their studies, but like them having intellectual freedom of opinion. This is how you can allure people, and when people are satisfied, they're more difficult to control. But you genuinely have to. If you are a company that was sustaining by Machiavellian tactics, then this, like, you could be very easily, or you could be very easily finessed at this time. You could be very easily penetrated at this time. But I see this not as a malefic attack when Mars is retrograde, but more an experimental. It's more of giving a chance to adopt, given a chance to to fulfill the needs of Venus in Aquarius, and Venus in Aquarius needs the freedom to explore, and appreciation for her intelligence, not as much, not like sucking up to the person, but more appreciation of their own uniqueness that they have to bring to the table. Um, so around that time would be a good time to make sure that those needs are met, because when those needs are met, then it's more difficult to finesse someone who is not so liable to abuse because their needs at the workplace are being met. So Venus, soft skills, connectional skills, relational skills, understanding that those, like how does a Venusian person feel loved, is by giving them freedom to explore and freedom to come with something new. So Mars making this contact to Venus will need to update its strategy, will need to update its wording, will need to upgrade its communication, so that when Mars goes direct, he's more competent with working with that new cycle of Venus, who is A, very much informed in what's happening in the Capricorn area, B, very much reality checked with what's happening with the Lilith and Cancer zone, and now is delving into her own creative needs and intellectual freedom needs. So intellectual freedom cannot go with too much surveillance, for example, or if you try to surveil someone who is, who desires intellectual freedom and has the capacity to ensure that they might expose you, they might flip it on you, or they just might quit. Okay, so that's what I can think about in the cycle. And Venus is of course approaching Saturn here, but she has already left Capricorn, so I should have stopped right at, let's see, January 4. Yes, so Venus ingresses in to Aquarius in January 3. I did a bit more than I was intending to do. So the last transit was already, last two transits, okay, with Jupiter and with Mars, were already with Venus in Aquarius. My bad. You got you got a bit of an extra cycle of Venus. January 3rd, Venus ingresses into Aquarius. So all in all, a bit of a recap. She's going to trine Uranus, conjunct Mercury, applied square Chiron, apply to conjunct Pluto, and oppose Lilith while she's in Capricorn. All in all, less exciting than when she's in Aquarius. So now it's to the second part of this video, and I think this would be actually a very good time to do a bookmark. I don't know if I can do a bookmark. If I cannot, I cannot write in my own, like I cannot write in my own live. Let's see what's in there. Okay. Well, that would be a good time to do a bookmark. It's this 1/18/2022. And now I just want to talk about Venus in Capricorn, period. So, Venus, although astronomically Venus is one of the least hospitable planets in our galaxy, she is considered traditionally a kind of planet that is nourishing life, to do with a warmer environment. I think she's warmer than the moon. It's warm and moist, if I'm not mistaken. I think she is warm and moist. Oh, wow. I need to remember that. And she's associated with bringing things together, with connecting things. Okay? a yin type, connecting things. It's not the moon yin that is reflecting, but the one that brings things and people together. And that's why she was also esoterically mistaken or interchangeably used with both, you know, the notion of Lucifer, the light bringer, and of Mercury, as Mercury is about agreements in trade. And Venus is also very deeply associated with trade, but Venus is the type of trade that you would get for a win-win. I know that you could probably have no arguments against that, and yes, she is way more complex than we think. Um, Venus can appear as both the morning star and the evening star. If I'm not mistaken, she right now appears as the morning star. Okay, not sure. No, probably the evening star, because in our hemisphere, I think she goes into the, um, yeah, she's like the evening star, and then she's Inanna from Uruk, if I'm not mistaken, or she's Aphrodite right now. I don't know if she's Aphrodite or Inanna right now, Ishtar. Um, but in general, when you think about Venus, you think about relationships, values, women, um, the kind of trade that is a win-win, a good deal. You think about also sensual pleasure. Venus rules Taurus, so that would be sensual pleasure, and she rules Libra, which is more an aesthetical pleasure, or the philosophy of aesthetic, or moral philosophy that is aesthetical. And you can make whatever you want around that. Um, she's exalted in Pisces, and Neptune is considered the higher octave of Venus. Um, I think higher octave is too much of a simplistic mode, but there is a point there. You know, you can think about it as there is no smoke without fire. So in a sense, even when we say the higher octave, however far-fetched, there is something, there is an essence to it, because Neptune is also about higher arts and also poetry and so on and so forth. And Venus is very much related with the voice, both the voice in its physical sense, the aesthetic pleasing to the ear voice, but also voicing our voices, being creative, singing, expression and artistic expression, as well as the gallery and the garden. So that's Venus. And when we talk about the gallery and the garden is already beginning to be something that could be in common with Saturn, that is the ruler of Capricorn. Saturn is the triplicity ruler of Earth signs. So all Earth signs, Virgo, Capricorn, and Taurus, are not too far from being associated with Saturn. And you know, we talked about agriculture earlier in this episode when I looked at what Venus is going to do during Capricorn, and I leaked a bit into Aquarius by chance. Saturn is connected to long-term dedication. And when you think about the marathon versus a sprint, you understand that, you know, in a marathon, you cannot run as fast as you run during a sprint. You have to have more rest. You have to bring the rest into your working routines. You have to work slowly and diligently so that you do not exhaust yourself, so that you can climb that mountain, so that you can reach the top, so you can reach the end. And so there is a lot more rest involved in the dedication of Saturn than, for example, of Mars. Okay? Saturn also rules agriculture, and what we know about agriculture is that there's time to plant seeds, there's time to harvest. And what's interesting, Saturn is ruled by is around karma, but it is a lot more intricate than it is. You say, oh, you reap what you sow. Anybody who has sown seeds know that you don't reap what you sow, you reap maybe 10% of what you sow, if you are being very diligent and if the weather is with you. And that's what people don't get about karma, because there is this notion of you're going to put in the work and you're going to make it. No, you're going to put in the work and then it's in God's hands, it's in the planet's hands, and you can do everything right. You can plant the seeds at the right time, you can make sure the earth is moist, you can make sure you water the plants and you give them the vitamins and you give them enough sun and you take away the sun when needed, because sometimes if they do, when they grow through the germination, they actually have to be in the dark, because we have to imitate the underground, but then maybe they need a bit of sunlight. So it's a lot more intricate than that. And even if you do maintain all the things, everybody who has ever germinated seeds know that sometimes or many times or in many seeds, they're not all going to germinate, even in the best of conditions. And you can't even necessarily talk about the natural election because you don't know which seeds are going to be elected this time for this cycle. Okay, and then they germinate and you plant them. Some of them are not going to make it. And this is the very harsh reality check of Saturn. It's what it actually takes to grow and nourish life long term, to grow and nourish food long term, to tend to something, understanding that you could have the best of timing and you better, that you can have the best of care and you better. If you water your seeds too much, they're going to die. So you need to also to have the right measurement, and so you need to rest in as much as you need to work. Saturn is about letting stopping. Saturn is the seventh day, is the Shabbat, which is the day that basically the people who are believing in Judaism do not work in Shabbat. You can, traditionally, you cannot even turn on the light in your room. People go on Friday, they put the light on in the bathroom because they cannot turn on the light. And if somebody suddenly switches the light off, you have to have somebody who is not Jewish to put the light on, which is, I have, to me, a bit funny, but the notion is that you must rest. And in the seventh year, you do not plant more seeds, okay? That's Saturn. And that's the karma, is not only if you've worked hard enough, it's also if you took enough time to rest. Because then you also have, because you're overworked, you also have karma. And if you take the garden, the beauty of the flowers, the arrangement of something to be pleasing for the eye, and the notion of nourishing, of watering, of resting, then you begin to see how Saturn and Venus can come to fruition together in a harmonious aspect. Okay? When we talk about relationships and relationship astrology, which is something that everybody is, probably forced to deal with, whether they like it or not. This is what people pay money for. So, will I have money? Will I have a partner? When will I have a partner? When will I be rich? Are the main questions that you get asked as an astrologer. You have to be able to answer them if you want to get anywhere far in most times where an astrology was practiced. Except for the astrologies of kings and the mundane astrology, yes, but probably before a person became a mundane astrologer, unless he grew up in a society where it's like fourth, third generation of astrologers, like what people would go to an astrologer for is either their ailments or their partners, or for arranged marriage, which is still practiced in various regions in the world. And when you look at the long term, it's like a marriage, okay? Marriage astrology, you are looking for a fine aspect between Venus and Saturn. You're looking for Saturn to be involved. Now, for the moon, too harsh, it's the emotional safety, okay? So it's not usually desired. For Mars, too fucking weird. For the sun, the sun is the shining. So it is for Venus. And a harmonious aspect between Saturn and Venus gives you longevity to the connection. That is what you want Saturn for, longevity to the connection. You also want the moon to be growing at the time with the people meet or commit or whatnot, and in a good aspect, blah blah blah. But when I think about Saturn and Capricorn ruling agriculture, ruling also finances and the type of investments that you make long term. That's why it's also ruling banking, because it rules debt. Banks make money by debt. Okay, they sell you debt. And if for some godforsaken reason you buy that volitionally, then they would just sell you more debt because they make money from the interest that you pay. And if you are investing, the only way they make money, if you're investing a whole lot of money that they can lend to other people and then receive the interest for that. But you're very likely to only invest in a bank if you have like zero to no choice, and you're very likely to only invest in a bank when you're taking debt. So you have one investment account and then you have one debt account, and if you're very lucky, then you're running it through the fund and the trusts, so it's not running on your name, and that's how you get okay with banks. And Saturn rules debt. Debt equals commitment. Unfortunately, people think that commitment equals debt, and sometimes when people want to get commitment, they get in debt together. Okay, when a couple marries, then they are expected to buy a house, and a house is a joint commitment that they have. I even knew a person that his wife wanted to marry him, and they bought the house together, or he bought the house, or whatnot. They bought the house together. He told, but we bought the house together. We have a commitment. She said, no, I want marriage as well. So that's an actual story about debt and commitment and marriage. And with Saturn, if you think about, you're planting a seed that will only grow after a while into something that you can eat. So you have to be enjoying the process. That's Venus. And you have to be dedicated. And you have to let it go, because if you keep checking up on it every day, like did you develop a flower? Did you develop something? Did you develop a leaf? Then it might die on you. Venus in Capricorn is the Venus that enters the domain of long-term commitment to something. Now, if you have that natally, that can express itself in various ways. First of all, I need to look at your Saturn. The fact that Venus is in a Saturn ruled sign, it may mean that Venus wants something long-term. I need to look at Venus. What does she want? Okay, she might be avoiding long-term stuff even. Or she might be more aware of what it takes to have something long-term. So practicality is big with Venus in Capricorn. You need to look at Saturn. How is Saturn in your chart? How is Saturn aspected? Is it retrograde? Is it direct? What aspects does it make? What sign is it in? Does it aspect Venus? How does it aspect Venus? And you need to understand that the Saturn is a lot about a reality check around something. So Venus in Capricorn, you also need to see what decanent faces Venus in Capricorn, what degree is Venus. So in the beginning, she might just desire something long term, but not be aware of what it takes to make it. In the later degrees, she might even be a bit of a commitment phobic, because she understands what a commitment is, and she's not so quick to make that decision. Now, commitment is not only to a marriage partner. Commitment, it can be to your type of career. It can be to the way you hold money, the way you invest. It can be to your field of interest if it's the fifth house. Okay, maybe you have all kinds of hobbies So if it's well aspected, you might have, one hobby that you hold for a long time, and you know that this is something that you enjoyed achieving something, or maybe you're enjoying building things, or maybe you're enjoying gardening, um, and it's a very practical Venus for a person. Let's say a person or a man with this Venus can be the type of man who will, fix your plumbing and make sure you have food on the table, but will feel very strange if you expect him to say I love you, because that's just not the way that they express affection. They're being practical. They're working very hard so that you will have your safety. But it's very difficult for them to express love in the ways that you might also need. Okay, or they can be traditional about the love making, or what the love language that they have. Um, for a woman with this aspect, again, it can be a woman who is actually looking for someone who can offer a certain sort of status, or who is, she can be very practical about her commitment, or that she might also try to offer. She might even be the type of woman that cooks you nice food, that even gives you a good word of advice of how to go up the rank, or she's maybe working up the rank, or maybe she's a career woman. Um, and it's not necessarily going to be the type of flamboyant, free, depending on other factors, type of spouse. Um, Another Venus Saturn. So Venus Saturn is also something that rules the skin, uh, tending to gardening, tending to the skin, working with crystals. Crystals are actually great for these crystals that you rub against your facial skin. That can be a good practice for Venus Capricorn, to sort of merge these two energies. Saturn also rules rings. Um, but you want to make sure that you're engaging, that you're doing a practice. For example, if you're just wearing a rose quartz ring, you can just bring about the conflicts that this placement may give you, according to your chart, so that you can deal with them. Okay, but if you set intention to find solution to these conflicts, or if you design the ring in a certain way, then you can bring about certain solutions, or bring about certain ways, because Venus and Saturn, they do have a lot in common. They do have a lot in common, um, but this is a more practical notion of um, love language, of value, of investment. Um, it can be the type of person who is aware of the need to use soft skills to go up the rank. That can also be Venus in Capricorn. So, all in all, it's the type of Venus that, when well aspected, she doesn't ask if something is right. She asks, how does it work? What do I need to do to get this result? And she goes ahead and studies how to do that. And I'm not saying that in a Machiavellian way. It's just an understanding that it won't help me to cry of why do I plant 10 seeds and only 2 of them germinate. What I need to do is understand, how do I improve the chances for these seeds to germinate? What do I need to raise a tree and make sure that I can eat the fruits? It doesn't do me any good to cry that that seed did not grow. It does do me some good to understand, of the things that are in my control, what can I do different to get the better results, understanding that I can do everything right, and still there is the hand of the cosmos that is in things that I cannot always control. And it doesn't do me any good to sit and cry about that. So it's an incredibly practical, incredibly, potentially high achieving, um, very, reality, very reality oriented type of Venus. Um, while it can be traditional, there is an aspect, and you need to remember Saturn rules Capricorn. Saturn is also ruling Aquarius. If you think about time, you're not just thinking back into history, you're also thinking about the future. The understanding that if you want to grow, let's say a carrot, for me the first tree that I was thinking to plant was actually carob tree, knowing that I probably won't eat from its fruit, but for other people to eat from the fruit, and understanding that people do cut off trees, then I definitely want to plant some so that other people will be able to eat from that fruit. This is thinking into the future, and it's thinking as deep into the past and as deep into the future. So we should not forget the future-oriented aspect also of Capricorn before we even go to Aquarius, also of Capricorn, because Capricorn knows how it was done before, but Capricorn also knows how many technological revolutions were, for example, in relation to agriculture. And it has to predict what the next 70 years are going to look like, what the next 150 years are going to look like. Think in terms of trees, you think about 1,000 years, because some trees live for 1,000 years. So you need to understand what are you doing for the next 1,000 years. So you think, look back. Some of these cycles must have been repeating themselves, sometimes even more than once. So there's a lot you can learn from. That's the type of Venus Capricorn oriented thinking. And again, Venus is also food, which is another thing that is very much in common with Capricorn. Okay, what food is going to look like 1,000 years from now? How many times was solar car invented in the past couple of centuries? And when are we expected to finally see them being used by common people, and what the common people are going to look like by then? Okay, that's another thing, that Venus Capricorn is very much oriented towards. And so you can understand from the vast dedicated awareness of time, going as deep into history, as deep in, growing roots deeply into the ground, and what it takes to grow roots. It can have an appreciation also of certain form of, I don't want to say suffering, because it's not exactly suffering per suffering's sake. It's more about the contraction aspect. For example, if you grow a plant, okay, in the beginning stage, you bring a plant home, you don't water it from above, you water it from underneath it. If it's just a plant, growing in separately and not in the ground, you water it from the underneath. Why? Because you want it to grow the roots deeper enough to the ground, and then it's strong. Or if you grow like an avocado from the seed, then it grows, and then you cut the trunk, and then it grows again, then you cut it again, and only the third time do you let it grow, and then you understand that this is helpful for it to grow strong into the future. And so understanding that certain types of deprivations are actually constructive to growing strong. Okay, that's another attribute of the Venus Capricorn. It is the type of Venus that's going to take a look, if it's a relationship. So how do you behave during, if you plan for, let's say, a big event of wedding. So the frugal part of Venus Capricorn can think, well, we don't need that. We want to save that maybe for buying a house. Another sort of idea can be, well, we actually do need that because it brings on a lot of financial pressure, and I want to see how do we behave under financial pressure before we buy a house. So that's the sort of thinking that you have. It's an understanding that certain types of deprivations are not bad for you. Um, so when you have that natally, it's something you contend with your entire life. Um, Grief and sadness and tears are just a part of reality sometimes. Um, and you would also need to see the merit in feeling, because it's very much earthbound, and um, if you feel everything, then there's going to be a lot that you feel, because you're going to contend with certain sort of suffering and deprivation a lot for something to grow strong, for many things to grow strong in your life. Um, and you understand that's just a part of that. It can be, if it's around your seventh house, then yes, that can be that relationships come usually later in life. Saturn is maturing at around 36. It doesn't mean that you won't have a relationship earlier, or that you have a relationship with someone who is older, or that you are older than that person. There's a certain effect of teaching that can come along with that. And again, you need to see how is it aspected. Is it working in your favor? Is there an abuse of power happening there? And sometimes, because of the intergenerational part to do, Venusian can be sister, the Venusian can be women in your life, and the Venusian can be your spouse. So sometimes that Capricornian Venusian, it can seem abusive to you from your vantage point, while from their vantage point, they just want you to grow stronger. So they might deprive you of certain things. And also, if there is actually an actual age gap, it can be that they used to grow in certain sort of deprivation that they believe made them stronger, and is now seen as abuse. And this is something you really need to take into account, um, because that can sometimes create a lot of difficulties and a lot of hardships. For example, a good example is that in the past, in the army, they used to believe in water discipline, where basically they deprived soldiers of water, and many people died before they changed that and realized that the deprivation of water is actually not something that's constructive to soldiers growing stronger. And that's actual abuse, because like the soldiers die. They don't grow, they don't, it's not like the plants that they're able to sustain themselves with less water, or they grow their leaves differently, they just die. So it can be something like that, it can be something that significant. Okay, and sometimes it's psychological abuse, sometimes that's financial abuse, even all kinds of stuff that can happen between children and parents. um, in the good aspects, it can be, that you're, for example, the type of child that grew up to a family where the mother or the father made you make money on your own and learn how to make money on your own, so that you can have this skill and you're independent of them, and you're independent of their money, and independent of their wealth. You can make it on your own even if you lose everything tomorrow. And that can, sometimes be the type of deprivation that again is too much. Okay, spoke about the Venus sextiling the South Node in Scorpio, and where how sometimes the training can be so overwhelming that the person feels like, I'm retired, I'm a veteran, after they just had training, and need to leave that behind because that's a boundary for them. But on other times, that can actually grow a person where they've been deprived of certain things, even though they grew up to, let's say, a wealthy family, and now they know that even if they lose everything, they know how to make this money as long as they have XYZ. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it does give them a sense of achievement, a sense of groundedness, a sense of confidence, a sense of security. The big danger here is that what your parents or what your spouses or what the women in your life try to do, or the type of deprivations that they try to put you through to make you grow, could be like ending up like the water discipline that was actually lethal. Um, and that is a danger. That, Saturn touches the edge of life as well. It's not from a scorpionic place, but it is, although Saturn is in Scorpio, but it is the end of life. Okay, it's sometimes, how do you make something stronger? You bring them closer to their end, and so they grow, they change their decision making. Okay, they change their metabolism and so on, but sometimes that's actually deadly. Okay. um so this is for natal. Transit. Transit is more transient, it's less like, how much is it, like a month? Yeah, around a month and a half that Venus is going to spend in Capricorn. Well, it's not much. But this is a time where, take everything that I said about natal Venus in Capricorn and understand that this month and a half is, you're going to have to discern between the type of disciplines that are good for you and the type of disciplines that are lethal. And and you don't have a lot of time to do that. You only have a month and a half, and Saturn works slowly. So it's a time for the type of care that is practical, and with Neptune direct, I can't tell you it's a time to put money aside, but it's a time for assessing which of the traditional values actually do hold waters today, which need to be transformed, and Venus is going to have an abundance of challenge to their traditional values. So in that field, in the Capricorn area of your life, and I need to know what house is it. Let's say it's your 10th house. So, how are you managing with bosses? Maybe you have bosses that have certain traditional values that are going to be challenged. Maybe you are the boss and your traditional values are going to be challenged. We spoke about the square to Chiron, and how you may have been, reaching a certain position of management in your own corporation or in the or in your own entrepreneurship, and you think, okay, I'm going to do that and that and that for the employees, and I'm going to start a new tradition. And some of them receive that very well, and some of them say, well, the very fact that you are above us on the rank, this is what we don't like, and this is what needs to be changed. It doesn't matter how many pets we can bring to work, because we are heading towards Aquarius, right? So you can be extremely challenged at this time, and really need to understand what can you take from it. Venus is going to go through another cycle with Pluto. This transition, you can go to the beginning of the video and watch the entire video to understand what Venus is going to go through when she passes through Capricorn, how significant it is for another cycle of the Venus Pluto to begin with Mercury close by, Mercury retrograde, on a mundane level. And if you are, in any way working with the United States or related to the United States in the Sibley chart, it's a big deal. And you will really need to reassess what types of dedications, what types of commitments, what types of also what are you letting go of, because Saturn is also about endings. What types of things, what types of values, what types of people, relationships are you letting go of for you to be able to continue? And there can be a lot of grief associated with that, because that's death, right? You might be saying goodbye to certain leaders, to certain thinkers, to certain gurus that have affected your thinking. Yeah, and generally when Venus transits through Capricorn, Then that can meet you can meet Venusian figures, all types of Venusian figures, as well as business opportunities through that Capricorn house in your chart. And then you need to see how is Venus aspected right now with Pluto in Capricorn, with the square to Chiron, even the square to Jupiter. Is less easy than people think it is, even though it's not harsh, but it's just sometimes where you will end up investing in more emotional eating than maybe you thought to buy something for your garden, and then you had to break up with the partner, and now you're holding grief in your heart, and you're like, oh fuck it, I need a box of chocolates. It can be something as simple as that. So general word for Venus in Capricorn transit. um, you know the rule of the 80-20. What is the 20% efforts that you've been doing that gave you the 80% results? Keep doing them. So this is a good time to go 80-20 about the Capricorn house in your chart. What is the 20% effort, the 20% of the entire sets of things that I've been doing in my business, in my social life, in my relationship, in wherever Capricorn is, that gave me 80% of the results. Okay? If I think about, I don't know, growing my social media, then I can say something that is sometimes not even related to necessarily what I do here on YouTube, but actually other practices, like even growing my garden, that gave me a certain sort of something to speak about and a certain sort of persistency to keep recording however many views I had. And that definitely is something that, consistency, something that eventually yields results. Somebody's going to run into you, somebody's going to get to know you. When I've been doing, for example, Spirit of Matter, I had sometimes maybe only 14 views, and then I'm right in the midst of interview. I think it was with Angelita, and she was like, I was just watching she was like watching, binge watching my channel, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I only had 14 views, but look who are the views, look who are the people. And sometimes you can be surprised that you only have a few, but those few are quality people that you can actually talk with, and that can end up being more meaningful than sometimes having have people who have YouTube channel. There was a story about this YouTuber who came into a YouTube show, and she had like million subscribers and so on, and nobody came to her stand in the physical event, and she prepared like bracelets for everyone, and she was devastated. And then other YouTubers supported her and so on, but nobody of her fans, of the millions of fans that she had, came to the physical event. um, and so sometimes having that small group of people that care that you can actually talk with is equal more than certain other types of success that are also important and are also funnels and are also income related, and so on and so forth. And sometimes the dedication that you have to your craft. Just yesterday I had a talk with a very famous Israeli astrologer. Then the guy tells you, whenever I feel like I'm growing somewhere and changing something, then I need to talk to you. And I was like, whoa. So I might not have a lot of people, but it's the quality of the people that matters. And this is something that you can, Saturn is not usually about great numbers because it is a contraction. It's about quality more than quantity in many cases, but sometimes it can be actually about, like big numbers and understanding that only a few will grow and a few will bloom. So you can similarly be looking at your efforts or your means and what was actually constructive in your Capricorn house. And this is a recap you will do every year and a half or so, or 2 years, and kind of look back and see, okay, what do I need to change right now, but also what am I keeping, or what am I doing more of? Okay, if I did this 20%, then this 20% is proving so successful and so meaningful to me, then how am I doing more of that? And maybe that increases, the results, maybe not. Sometimes just doing more of that is not effective because you were doing just enough and there's nothing more you can do. Um, so that's a word for Venus in Capricorn. If things that are Venus in Capricorn, rose quartz. And here you have to be careful because, like I said, bringing two energies together is going to bring a myriad of possibilities for these energies to work together. So just, wearing a rose quartz because it's a crystal and it has to do with Venus, or green crystals as well, not the moldavite, but it's more Uranus related. And I have another story about moldavite. Um, but just, crystals, that can be great, but that can also stir up certain things. I was sleeping with watermelon tourmalines, both green and pink. And I woke up feeling unloved, and I was like, "Why? What the heck was happening?" And apparently, it was dredging up certain emotions that I had, or certain, it's like dredging up the history of my heart. And there were times where I felt, unloved or unseen or so on and so forth. And then I said, oh, whatever, I'm just going to study something new. Then I, fixed my bed, and then I saw this tourmaline back there. So I said, I'm going to put it next to the turmeric so it can have nourishment. But that's something that can happen. You work with the crystal because, hey, for me that was not intentional. Because like, hey, Venus, I always work with crystals, but it's like Venus, Saturn. Okay, so crystal that is green or pink, and green and pink in the case of tourmaline, and then you wake up dredging and purging all your heartbreaks since the history of your making. This is something that can happen. So when I say what energies you can be working with, it doesn't mean that it's going to make you happy. It means that it's going to do what it needs to do so that you can have a chance to address something and then resolve it. Okay, for example, if you have felt, in terms of holistic medicine, the body keeps the score, if you have felt unloved or heartbroken, someone in your past, and that memory still holds in your heart, and you actually cry and you let go and you feel the grief, and you wake up and when you purge it from your body and you change that cellular memory, or you can address that, or you can see it in a new light, or you can accept that and put it in the past, then that's something good that you did for your heart. It didn't feel pleasant, but it's actually something good that you did for your heart, because you would keep on going with this memory and repressed somewhere, and then it would form some sort of an ailment somewhere, and maybe by the fact that you brought it upward and cried it away, you can actually begin to recover, and you can begin to recover from the root. So when I'm going to list the things that you can do, it's not necessarily going to make you feel happy, but it can, on the long run, keep you dealing with things or sorting things out. So, of course, agriculture, growing a garden with the new moon in Capricorn. So, with the first crescent, you can plant seeds. Venus in Capricorn, so you might want to grow flowers. If you want to grow flowers from the seed with the new moon in Capricorn, that's a possibility. You can grow certain types of food. Okay, you can, for example, I have a lot of, I have like fennel and garlic and celery that I just brought in the grocery, and I put them in some water and they begin to grow. They begin to regrow. So that's something nice that you can do that integrates the energies of Venus and Saturn. Another thing that you can do right now when the moon is still decreasing, so you can pay your debts. If you have debts or deal with debts, or call who you need to call, make that phone call, that thing that you've been postponing, and close that, or make another step towards closing that. That can be if you want to treat your teeth. Okay, this is a good time to go to treat your teeth by a female doctor, Venus. So if you have like a female doctor, then you can make an appointment to treat your teeth, schedule an appointment, make sure that Saturn is okay. But this is better for the moon decreasing. When the moon is increasing, if it's something invasive, then that can be a bit more problematic. When the moon is decreasing, it's better time to do so. If you still catch it when the moon is decreasing. Another thing that you want to do in this cycle is cosmetics. Again, when the moon is decreasing, if it's not invasive, then that's okay. But if you still catch it when the moon is decreasing, if you need to remove, well, hairs from your body or whatnot, or trim your nails, or anything that you do when the moon is growing smaller, then that can be a nice, a nice thing to do. Start a new skin routines, anything skin related, treating skin related issues in ways that is non-invasive. Um, that can be another great thing to do. So bone density, I think swimming can be great because it's bone density. It's an activity that is bone density related, but only if it's pleasurable, because Venus favors those activities that are pleasurable. You're not capitalizing on Mars here. There's action. You're capitalizing on pleasure and sensual pleasure. So using the waters, going to the water, or traveling to the mountains. That can be great. Painting the mountains, painting Saturn related, painting skeletons. I don't know. Like it can be. That's another thing. And now you do have to remember that it will stir up everything or a lot of the things that are Saturn and Venus related. If you have Saturn hard aspect to Venus in your natal chart, it will bring it up. So it doesn't bring it up so that you will suffer, it brings it up so that you can purge it, so that you can do something, so you can change your view about it, so you can accept it and move on. And that in that way, that can have a bit of a therapeutic effect, and it's the therapeutic effect of Capricorn. Okay, in Hebrew, seripui, so Capricorn is more like healing by doing something, by being active about something. It's like the effect, the healing and the therapeutic effect that gardening has on your psyche, something like that. Okay, it's that sort of healing. It's not the the scorpionic dredging into your psyche sort of healing. It's more like, hey, that's a life experience that I've had, and you're reflecting upon it, you're processing it, and you move on. Nothing too serious about it. Okay, it's not going through the gate to the valley of death. Okay, that's a bit Saturnian too. Um, but you're not coming to be transformed, to be born anew by an intense experience. It's a slow transformation over a long period of time. So you're starting things with the new moon that are going to bloom, that are going to take at least 6 months to bloom because of the moon cycle, Venus cycle, then at least a year and a half, 2 years to culminate. And because of the Saturn effect, then that can be for the next even 28 years. Okay, now Saturn is still going to be in Aquarius. So those are some of the things that you want to take a look at. So depth, relationships, your relationship with depth. Some of you might be taking mortgage or long-term commitments. Do that with the new moon, of course. With the first crescent moon, or when the moon is growing in, it's a good aspect, of course, not when the moon is decreasing. Um, or although some would say when the moon is decreasing because you want to pay that, I don't know. But because it's something new, then it's a new commitment. Okay, so uh, I don't know. It's a question. Should you take a mortgage when the moon is growing or when the moon is decreasing? Big question actually. It's a bigger question. I don't have one answer to tell that. Um, so yeah, take into account that what you're starting with the new moon in Capricorn is Saturn related. Think at least at least 28 years. And then you can think back 14, you can think back 7. But at least think, think to the 28. If you start something in the new moon, this new moon, manifest something in this new moon, think to the 28. And right now you still have time to go 20 years, 28 years backwards, and recap all of the things that happened to you the last time Saturn was in Aquarius. And with Venus and Capricorn, so relationships, business, debt, um, rings, commitments, gardening, land, agriculture, food, your health sometimes, because all those things are impacting our health, even if it's not in the 6th or 12th house. And then think, okay, do the 2080. Now it's the good time to do the 2080. We're also before the New Year's resolution. New Year's resolution is not so much about what's going to happen this year, but I should probably do a video about New Year's resolutions and astrology, because the new year is like, it's not an astrological event. Okay, the new moon in Capricorn is an astrological event. Um, so it's a good time to do recap, but not recap of the last year, but recap of the cycles of Venus, recap of the cycles of Saturn, and that's only for this transit, okay? That is more useful to you than just looking at some, 365, 64 days that don't tell you anything much, and they can't predict the next 364 days very well. So yes, I think this was a very Venus and Capricorn video, a lengthy one, a very detailed one. Now it's coming to its end. Um, so you can let me know, where is Capricorn in your chart? Uh, what happened the last time Saturn was in Aquarius for you? And what are those 20% of things that you've been doing that gave you 80% results in your Capricorn house, in your Venusian dealings, all those calculations and computations. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.